Okay, so I'm back now. Thanks for your patience. So we're going to talk about SLP assessments. So when we're assessing a bilingual individual, it's important to observe their language abilities in each of their languages. And we also want to observe how these languages work together. So we don't want to just look at them as two monolinguals all in one person, but we really want to see how each of their languages work and how they work together. So some of the questions we're going to ask are questions around age of exposure. So this can be captured through a parent questionnaire, the amount of exposure, so really looking carefully at how much exposure the child has to each of their languages, with who, in what contexts, and are there areas that have changed recently or over the course of the child or the individual's lifespan. And all of that will contribute to understanding, again, and predicting and thinking about their language proficiency. We're going to want to assess their first language, so the first language the individual learned, and sometimes in the case of simultaneous bilinguals, we're just assessing one of their two languages. So it doesn't have to be the official first, it's just one of their two because they have two first languages. And then we're also going to look at their second language. And these assessments need to be adapted to the language context. And as you'll see later on, we'll talk about that there's the tools aren't always available in each of the person's languages, nor are they available for the dialect that the person speaks. So it's important to keep those considerations in mind and really do the best we can to capture information about both of their languages. So some cultural considerations and assessments. So when we're assessing language development, we need to remember that the child's goal in learning a language is to align with the language use in their communities. So we're not expecting the child, and we shouldn't be expecting any child, to reach an idealized norm or a monolingual goal, especially for the multilingual children. So really thinking about what is the language use expectations within their community as a goal, as much in their first as their second language. For adults, an SLP's goal should be to understand whether the individual is experiencing barriers due to communication abilities to participate in their communities. So again, really focusing on what that individual needs to be able to communicate within their community. So children may differ with regards to their use of gesture and nonverbal cues, and these may differ depending on what language they're speaking, and they may be differences compared to a monolingual white middle-class child. So our expectations should be adapted to the family's culture. Children may have different models for interacting with adults, particularly strangers, and children may have different vocabulary knowledge in each of their languages. So for example, have words that they know because they're words that we often use at school versus words that we often use at home. And really keeping in mind that the child's language use may be compartmentalized in a sense between home and school. So not knowing the word for parallel lines in their home language, because really we don't often talk about geometry or math knowledge at home. And that's more of a school-based language knowledge. And I say parallel lines because at least one of our vocabulary assessments in English include a term about parallel lines. So knowing that information is part of the standardized assessment. Of course, asking parents and other community members about expectations is important. So not just thinking, well, this might be culturally different, but really asking the family, I see that your child doesn't make a lot of eye contact with me. Is that something that's unusual in your community? Is that something that is expected in your community? And having that conversation. It may be awkward and a little not feel comfortable, but that's not part of our job. Our job is not to feel comfortable, but really to be able to put the family needs and comfort first. So making sure that they're at ease, that they're willing to share information with us, and we're able to take that information and be able to think about how that impacts our assessments. So when we think about bilingualism and communication disorders, there's a few myths. And one of the myths is that, well, bilingualism might be harmful to a child with a communication disorder. But bilingualism has been found to not cause or worsen communication disorder. Bilingualism can provide increased opportunities to communicate with family, peers, and other community members. So there may be actually some advantages to being bilingual if you have a communication disorder. So this applies to speech sound disorders, developmental language disorders, and developmental disorders. So to wrap up this part of the course, you may be still thinking or not convinced about the monolingual centered bias. Just move my little slide, my little self here. So perhaps you're thinking, does this really apply to me? I'm monolingual. I don't really have a culture. But a monolingual's language is influenced by their sociolinguistic community. So think about these examples. So somebody where you hear, she found her phone. Who would say that? A grandparent? Would it be you? Would it be a news reporter in your community? That's a snazzy phone. Who would say that? Your grandparent, you, a teenager? When you send a text message, do you sign your text message like you would a letter or an email, or do you know somebody who does? And who is that person in your community? So if you ever ended up text messaging me, you might actually see that I do sign my text messages, which indicates a little bit about where I am in terms of my community and my sociolinguistic context. So all of this is influenced. I think there's a great blog post that I'd like to send you towards that talks about the Canadian hug. As somebody who spent the past 12 years in Quebec, hugging is not really part of the French Canadian culture. There's other things that we do when we greet each other that we see. And in talking with some friends that are newer to Canada as well, this hug is a little bit unusual, especially in a community that we often think of as somewhat reserved, friendly, but reserved. And I think this provides some perspective on that we are all part of a culture and part of a community, and providing kind of that perspective that sometimes we forget we need. So what are some other language or cultural specific examples of your verbal and nonverbal communication? Maybe you're a bilingual or multilingual speaker, or maybe you're from a different cultural community within Canada. So what are some differences in the way you say hello or goodbye, depending on who you're saying it to? And with that, I'll let you go, and I hope you enjoy the next parts of our course, and we'll see you a little bit later when we talk about speech sound disorders. Thanks for your attention. And this is me needing to find the off button. See ya.